Hey everyone, Ryan with the Homestead Consultant here. I'm out at Love Farm. Today I'm going to be putting in swales, and I want to do a combination video of one explaining how to install the swales, the tools that you're going to need, the way that you use those tools, and some video on how to do all those things because that's really important to do it properly and not make a mess out of your property and out of your orchard. But the other part of it is that I want to explain the why. So I want to try to cover both things in one video to explain the why and the how. And hopefully that way, if you want to reference just the how, you can come back to this video and you'll have one section that's just how to do the installation and another section that's on the why. I'm going to start with the why and give you some information there. But if you don't need the why, if you don't need the information about the swales or the considerations to why to put swales in or why not to put swales in and what their use is and what their purpose is and where they might not be a good idea. If you don't want all that information, go ahead and skip ahead to that if you're just wanting to see what you need for tools and how to do the actual installation. In the meantime, I'm going to cover why we're putting swales in, why you might not want to, and what some of the considerations are there. So you can see the swales behind me. Those actually go on the other side of the camera as well. Swing around and show you here. So you can see the swales continuing that way. And these are, this swale is going to continue quite a bit further than you can already see it. But the purpose in the swale is to slow, spread, and soak water. So you'll hear that a lot in permaculture circles of what swales are for. Swales are a technique. They are not specifically permaculture. They're used in other systems of design as well. But in permaculture, they're well known for the purpose of slowing the water as it comes down the hill to slow erosion, spreading it out against slow erosion, and soaking it, which will rehydrate the soil both at the swale location and then also downhill from the swale as well. Because that water, as it gets underground and slowly moves out, it improves soil, it increases the hydration of the area, and actually changes much of the hydrological cycle. So that's why we put in swales, but there are times when swales are not appropriate. So I wanted to mention a few times when swales aren't really appropriate. If you've got land that soaks water well already, that is loamy and relatively flat, and there's no erosion issues, and it has good fertility, but especially good moisture retention, there's really no need to start changing or scarring your landscape with swales. A lot of people want swales because they hear about them, they hear what a good idea they are, and then they put them in, and it actually really causes damage to the system rather than benefiting it. So if you're someplace like, I don't know, Black Earth, Wisconsin, where you've got the most beautiful loamy soil because a glacier came through and dumped highly fertile soil in that area, don't do this. Please don't do this. There's no reason to. You don't need to. There's lots of other practices that are a lot better. Some other considerations are you want to make sure that whatever area you're putting a swale in, that you're leaving access, that you have access you need, or that you're making the swales in such a way that there's good access. So in my case, I have two access points. Obviously, this swale, like I said, is going to go further, but at the end, we will have an overflow, and this whole aisle between the rows of trees. So I've got a row of trees here, a row of trees here, and this whole aisle section between that is actually going to be accessible from behind me here, as well as back here from either side. So we're going to be able to access these sections of aisles between the rows of trees without really any issue. And we're still going to be able to get to the back of the property, which is back here behind me. So back up over this hill. We'll still have access for vehicles and things. So I'll be able to mow these areas. A big error that I've seen made in swales is they're so deep, so aggressive that people can't mow in or around them. In this case, I've made these gradual enough. I could actually bring my mower all the way down in, so one wheel on one side is all the way down in that swale, and mow along it without hitting the soil along the edge or tipping the mower too much. So I have great access there. These aren't real big. That's part of why I'm calling them mini swales. So if I had to, I could actually drive over top of them, which I don't want to do for several reasons, but it's an option if I ever had to. So I'm not causing any access issues by putting these swales in. But if it would cause access issues, that's a reason not to put swales in. Another thing to consider is that swales are largely a tree growing system. In most cases, if you're putting swales in, barring a few specific exceptions, you're going to be wanting to grow trees on just the very edge of that downhill side, or the mound that you're putting on the bottom side of the swales. Part of the reason there is that the trees are going to have deep roots, and those deep roots are going to be a way for water to follow down into the soil. Because like I said, these swales are meant to be a soaking mechanism for water, rather than being a, like a pond that holds water. We want them to be permeable and for the water to actually soak down into the soil and rehydrate that landscape. And using trees that are going to have deep roots for that water to follow is vital in making sure that the swales work properly. So we kind of covered why not to put swales in. Another reason to put swales in is if you've got an area where you may have, say, a drainage ditch, or an area where a lot of the water consolidates and is causing erosion issues, you can actually put a swale especially at the key line location on that drainage way, and move water out from the drainage way out along the contour of the hill. And you can then move the water out of that drainage way so you stop getting nearly so much erosion. That can be done in multiple ways, but keylining or keyline swales, right as that section starts to go from being relatively flat to tapering harder, you'll put a swale just at the edge of that taper, and then you can put swales downhill in several places from there. And that will catch the water before it builds up too much momentum or volume. And that is a very, very useful way to stop erosion issues or to move water to a different part of the property. So in my case here, let me turn around and show you. Behind me here is a drainage way. If I wanted to, I could put a swale in that and actually move the water along here and out through this area, rather than keeping it in that drainage way. And that would allow me to take water from the drainage way, which is back behind the camera now, all the way out into the field that way. And maybe I could have the drain from, or the overflow from the swale be way out there. And I could even do something like have a pond downhill from that swale. And so instead of having only the option of, let's say, having a pond right about there where the drainage ditch drains into, I could actually use the water, put a swale up higher on that drainage way, bring the water along the swale, continue it along here, dump it out way out there where I could put a pond that might even be more useful, might be higher uphill for me. There might be a ton of benefits, but that's another use for a swale, is to actually not only spread the water, but to move it to other areas. So my overflow could be, way over there, as opposed to way back there. And I could use water that might be coming from, even from a neighboring property that I wouldn't typically get to use this high up on the hill. I could actually bring it towards me. So lots of uses for swales, lots of considerations and things to think about as how you're going to put the swale together, where you're going to start the swale, and where you're going to drain the swale or have the overflow, if not multiple places. Now, one more thing to mention is if your swales are deep enough, you can do things like put a culvert. Let's say I put a culvert right here, and then I took this berm and covered over it, and I made sure that the water could flow through that culvert, and the culvert was large enough to accommodate the volume of water that I was using. I could make effectively a very small bridge, culvert, driveway thing over that swale, and I could do that uphill at each swale. So that's another way to think about creating access if you've created a swale system or want to create a swale system where you need access and it would truly be beneficial. So it ticks all the boxes for a beneficial system, but to get the water out to where you want it, you're going to have to cover an area that would otherwise be an access area. You can make an area that has a culvert and a hard pack just for driving over, but the culvert allows the water to flow through to and continue down that other side of the swale. So I hope that gives you a good idea of the why we would want to make swales and some of the considerations for why not to put swales into your property. Another consideration is if they have some benefit but not a lot of benefit, there's a lot of work that gets put into installing these. So consider that before you go down this road. That swales are not always the answer that people think they are. Oftentimes there's simpler answers to water soaking than using swales. So an example of that would be if you've got a field that isn't absorbing water quite as well as you'd like, but it's close, use something like daikon radish. Invest the money into maybe a couple of pounds per acre of daikon radish and plant those in the early fall or early to mid spring. Just you can get a cheap broadcast spreader depending on how much space you have and how much you need to cover, or you can even hire somebody from, say, the farmers co-op or somebody who works with the farmers co-op to broadcast those seeds. There's other seeds. I have a whole program on planting your pasture for success and to improve soil quality. If you want that, go to my website, find my contact information, my email, and just reach out for my pasture improvement planting plan. It's a plan that can help you really improve your pasture over time. But that may be a much better answer than putting in swales. A lot less work, a lot less cost, a lot less scarring of the land that you're working with. It might just be a much better way of doing this. So consider all those factors. Consider what works for you, what makes sense for you and for your circumstance. There's a lot of different circumstances and a lot of different reasons why you may want to use swales or not use swales. So don't get stuck on this idea. As much as I love it and like the implementation of it here, there are a lot of places where I'm not using swales where I could be using swales. One more consideration that I have used for my property, not Love Farm where I'm at right now, but at my house, I've got a fairly steep hill, like a significantly steep hill that swales are not really an option on, but I did plant an orchard because the only real good use for that hill, because of how steep it is as an orchard, and I want the trees and things there to hold the soil in place anyways. But it's actually just uphill or downhill from my chicken coop. So I'm using what I'm calling a modified Gabion wall. If you look up Gabion walls on whatever search engine you use, avoid Google if you can. They're basically rock walls that are, again, on contour like we're doing with the swales here. But the rock walls, the purpose is for the water to hit it, and instead of eroding away, it spreads it out, just like our swale, but it's fully permeable. And what that does is it catches the silt and the things that are getting eroded. It spreads the water out so it slows it down. And so the water's kind of having to stair step down these systems. And that helps with a lot of the same ideas as the swale. But in my case, with the very steep hill, I'm actually creating small terraces. So as the chickens scratch and kick a lot of the material that they're working with downhill, which ends up being wood chips that are turned into soil, which is a whole nother story. So I'm not losing soil on my property, but they're actually kicking decomposed wood chips, which are now high quality soil and compost. Some of that's going downhill and I'm not getting to use that in, say, my garden. And now I have these rock walls that I've put on contour that are catching all that material that's running downhill and creating a flat spot behind the rock that builds up. So now I'm getting terraces on my hillside orchard. So that's something to consider as well. I'm calling what I'm doing a modified Gabion wall, because instead of doing the large wire mesh rock wall thing, what I'm actually doing is just taking relatively large stones and stacking them in a small, maybe foot high to 2 foot high, almost like retaining wall, but it's above ground. So an above ground retaining wall. And then as the material comes downhill, it gets stuck behind that, and I get a flat surface instead of an angled surface. So I get these terraces. So I get a flat surface here, and it drops off at that wall that I built. And then I get another flat surface, then it drops off. And so that's another thing to consider. If you've got a real steep hill, or you've got the appropriate, say you've got chickens uphill that are creating or building a whole bunch of soil or fertility that's running downhill, that's another way to capture and hold that. You can also take those Gabion walls and backfill with wood chips, which will eventually break down into soil, and you just keep doing that. And it can be a really easy way of terracing a hillside, a very strong, simple way of terracing a hillside while building soil. Here are some of the most important tools I'm going to be using. The very most important tool that I'm going to be using today is this A-frame level. I made this on my own, and I will show you how it works as we get into the video. But basically, you put a level on an A-frame, and the A-frame has to be perfectly level already in and of itself. And then that can be turned from end to end to find the on contour of the contour of the hillside that you're working with. So in this hillside, you can see it goes out and it's level if you follow this trajectory, and then by the time you get there, if you follow that in a little bit and then back out. And this A-frame tool will give me exact measurements of up and down. So each time I move it, I'll check the level of the bubble in the middle, make sure that it's level. And I can do that a few times, and every probably third time I'm going to put a stake in the ground, and then I'll tie a string between those stakes. And so directly under that string will be the bottom center of my swale, and that will help make sure that I'm not going up or downhill as I'm building the swale. This is very, very important, because if you go up or downhill, you will create areas where water will run over your swale and not fill it, so it becomes completely useless. So making sure that you're on level or on contour as you go across the landscape is absolutely vital for a swale to work properly. The next item is my shovel here. That's a kind of a standard spade shovel, but it's a higher quality one with a fiberglass handle, and it makes a big difference when you're digging, making sure that your shovel is sharp, making sure that you have fairly large foot pieces, forget what those are called, sorry, on the shovel. So a high quality shovel will make all the difference in the world. It will make your job a lot faster and a lot easier on you. I've got a measuring tape to measure distances between things. So if I want to make the swales a certain amount of feet apart, where I want to know exactly how long they are, that's a 100-foot ruler or 100-foot tape measure, which is really important. And then I'm going to be using these stakes. You can use other kinds of stakes. It really doesn't matter too much, but basically you want to be able to tie a visible string between the stakes that you're putting every few times that you use the A-frame level. And that's going to help you map out where exactly the swale should be. I wanted to show you what I'm doing here with the A-frame that you could see in the high speed. You can see that I've got that bubble almost dead center. It's just a tiny bit off. But what I'm doing is taking either side of this A-frame and pivoting over and over again and keeping that bubble level each time I do it. And that will keep me on a consistent contour. Let me show you as I do this. I'm going to pivot from that foot. So that foot stays actually right there. It stays in the same spot. And then I'm going to watch my level, and away from me is downhill. So right now the left-hand side is too high up. So I'm going to go downhill with my level, check again. That's pretty much spot on. So then now I pivot from this foot, and I'm going to check my level again, and that's pretty much spot on. And then I'm going to do it, in my case, I'm going to do it 3 times because that's the distance I want between each stake. So now I'm going to go from this foot and pivot, check my level, and there I'm on level. So that means this foot is at the exact same location as that post right there. So that little stake right there, and that edge or that foot of my level are in the exact same location. And that's true if you can see the several stakes back as well. Those are all going to be at the exact same level as that foot. So that's how these A-frame levels work. And of course, you can use a much larger A-frame, and probably a good idea to use a much larger A-frame. This was just something that I built this morning to use for this purpose for demonstration. And in my case, I actually fastened this level. I got a very inexpensive level, and I fastened it directly to the A-frame level so that it won't fall off. Here you can see the string line that I used, that I tied to these stakes, and that it curves. So that's curving with the contour of the land. And then you can see how I've used this string to keep my center for the center of the swale. So the swale goes from here to here. That's the down part. So that's what I'm using the string to calculate is the center of this. And then we have the part on the far side that comes back up. So here's what I'm taking out, and I'm using the string to center that, the low spot in the swale. And then I just use the material from the center here to go over here on the low side of the hill. So the hill's sloping this way, and so when the water runs this way, we'll come down into the swale here, fill that up, and then I have loose fill. This is not compacted, where when the water comes up, this will slow the infiltration through. So once it gets above the top of this trench, it will hit this, and it will continue to slow it and filter any of the water that's coming through. Here's me digging one of the sections of the swale. You can see that I'm taking scoops, and as I do it, I'm taking it from either side of the swale, pushing the shovel in at the angle that I'd like the swale to be at, and then I go along and remove any excess or unflat or areas that are uneven from what I was hoping. Then I take the material and I place that downhill from the swale so that the material is built up into a berm on the bottom side of the swale. In my case, I'm only digging down about 4 to 6 inches, no more than that, and only adding about 3 to 4 inches on the far side of the swale. So the deepest from one side to the other, as far as the swales are concerned, is going to be no more than 10 inches, which makes these very passable by foot and even by mower or vehicle. As I'm digging here, you can see that I'm digging underneath the line that runs between these stakes, and that helps keep me on centered as I go to make sure that I don't get off track. So this system over time will mature and will add features and things that would otherwise be what you would normally think of as being part of a food forest, and I'll explain that in a minute here. But we opted against the food forest system because there's some things that we can do with this system that we can't do with the food forest, or can't do in the same way. So one of the things is that when we have these rows of trees with aisles in between them, we're actually able to graze or bring animals in that section, in that aisle. And so I could bring sheep in to graze in this, in between the aisles, and put up temporary electric fencing. I can do the same thing with chickens or ducks. Ducks could actually be basically allowed anywhere within the orchard space. And so it gives us a lot of different potential options to bring and incorporate animals into the system. Another thing is it doesn't require as much input up front. So I'm not having to maintain and favor certain plants in the same way. I'm either able to run a mower through here. Eventually, I'd like to use something called a crimper, where instead of mowing, we're basically folding the grass over, and it becomes a, instead of a chop and drop mechanical grazing like mowing is, it actually becomes a ground cover that helps hold water further into the system. So those were some considerations as to why we did this. For now, it allows me to mow it quite easily in between the trees here. And then what we'll do to incorporate food forest ideas into the system is we'll use the existing trees. You can see trees along here that we're going to use as basically our canopy layer. And then instead of having a sub canopy like you would have as one of the layers in a food forest, because these are dwarf trees, we're actually going to have, we're going to go straight to that kind of like bush layer that is a lower height than the trees. So blueberries, blackberries. In fact, you can see some blackberries, a variety of blackberry that we've started here that's thornless, but tastes like a wild blackberry. Some people really enjoyed the taste of wild blackberries, and it reminds them of growing up. We've actually produced our own variety that's thornless. So anyways, we'll have blackberries through here, blueberries. We can even do things like sea berries that are a berry, but they're also a nitrogen fixer. We can add in other things like gooseberries or other smaller nitrogen fixing plants that will help in between the trees. And then in between those, we can go the next step down, which is going to be herbaceous. So we can do things like comfrey or Egyptian walking onions or other similar herbaceous plants along, and we're going to plant them basically along this the mound or the up part on the downhill side of the swale. So going down the main hill, you've got that mound that goes up and over on the swale here. That's what we're going to end up planting the bushes and herbaceous stuff on in between the trees. So beyond that, we can also plant tap-rooted things. That's going to be things like carrots, or in my case, I'm probably going to use a lot of radish, especially daikon or tillage radish. And that's going to be this entire space, the entire swale from the downhill side all the way through the dip here and all the way back uphill. And then in between the rows as well, those daikon radish, I've got a video on that. I'll link the video both in the description and hopefully on this video for you to click on if you want to see all the benefits to that. But they're huge as far as water absorption and remineralizing soil, things like that. It really helps with the soil life. So I'm going to be putting things like that in. We already have yarrow up here, which is pretty cool. So we've got quite a bit of wild yarrow. I've planted quite a bit of comfrey, and I'll continue to do that with the Symphoticum officinale, which is true comfrey or wild comfrey. But we will also probably start planting things like millet, winter rye, things like that in these aisles as a winter supplementary cover crop system for this orchard. So these swales are kind of becoming the basis for that. So we planted the trees on contour. Now we're putting swales in on contour, and those swales will be the basis for all the other things that we're putting into the system. I hope that gives you a basic overview of how to install your own mini swales in an orchard or on your property, and why also there's times and places where you don't want to install them, where they're not going to be a benefit to you. So definitely take the information you've learned here and go research some more, find some other information and cross-check it. So I'd highly encourage you to check out other people's videos and books and things on this topic, but I hope that gives you a primer into what you can do on your own property and what the benefits are. If I can help you in any way on your homestead, please let me know. You can find more information about what I do at thehomesteadconsultant.com. I hope you look that up and reach out. I love talking with other people who are homesteaders and permaculturalists who are really just trying to make a better life for themselves and their family. Thanks so much for watching.